Good morning, and welcome to the Wisdom of the Soul from the Southern California desert. And it's a pleasure to be with you. I hope you're in the holiday spirit. It is that time of year. It's a time that a lot of us experience as very stressful because there's just so much to do. And yet, you never want to get so worked up or stressed out that you miss the true joy of the season, families coming together, the giving, the fun, the recollections of childhood, the jingle bells and the merry, merry this and joyous that. I hope that the greetings of the season and the happiness of the season is with you. In addition to today, we will be here 1 week from today, which I guess is the 18th. And then, because Christmas and New Year's fall on Sundays, we'll go dark for 2 weeks and come back on January 8th. So we'll all take a break from this for a couple of weeks. Again, we will be here next week on the 18th, and then back again on January 8th. I think I've got those numbers right. So enjoy that time off. I also was reminded recently, I got an email from somebody who wanted me to recommend some books, and I thought, gosh, I have forgotten to mention that I do have a book list on one of my websites. It's my podcast site. So if you just went to michaelbenner.com and clicked on the podcast button, it'll take you there, or directly at theagelesswisdom.com. And up in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see reading list. If you just click on those words, reading list, you'll find some of my favorites in two columns, two categories: personal development and spiritual development. And scroll down through that list and let your intuition be your guide and get yourself a new book or two or more to read over the holidays and thereafter. There's just so many wonderful books on the subject, on the topic, that years ago, I think as long as I've been doing talk radio, I've been talking about books on the radio, and back in the early 70s even was mailing through the hard mail. The old school U.S. Post reading lists to people. It was a way that I would get their mailing addresses before there was email. And we used to do bulk mailing. It's hard to believe how much email and the internet has changed all of that. But check it out, theagelesswisdom.com, or go into the main site, michaelbenner.com, and click on the podcast button, and it's up on the upper right, reading list. Check it out for your dining and dancing pleasure. Today we're going to talk about the soul and the idea that in addition to, it's not the best way to say it, but I'll stumble along here and figure out a better way to say it. It's not that the idea of an indwelling soul is incorrect. It's in the wisdom traditions of the world, mysticism, it's understood that the indwelling soul is an extension or a fragment or a reflection, an outpicturing of an oversoul that exists above and free of form. And this is an ancient and yet, for the last 2,000 years, a very radical idea. Not only that the soul overshadows, but that the concept used to be called the preexistence of the soul, and it suggests reincarnation or transmigration, that the soul incarnates again and again. And transmigration even suggests that we could live lives as humans and be reincarnated as animals or other creatures, even insects, though there's nothing to suggest we could reincarnate as a plant. Apparently, it's limited to the animal kingdom. And then reincarnation sort of suggests transmigration limited to human, that once you're a human, you continue to reincarnate. So I'll talk a little about the preexistence of the soul as a concept that was quite popular among early Christian fathers, as well as Eastern philosophy. And that when the Roman Emperor Constantine decided that he was going to be a Christian for the early part of his life, he was a pagan. But he looked at the sun for a while, saw a cross, and decided that was a sign that he should be a Christian. And he organized in the 4th century A.D. this first Council of Nicaea. And that's when this whole idea got outlawed or banned, that you shall be forbidden to believe in the preexistence of the soul. So we'll talk about that today, and what are the implications? It's all what if. Again, this class, to the best of my ability, we want to avoid dogma or precepts that are rigid, and inform you in such a way that you get to think for yourself and make up your own mind, even if you have to cobble together a belief system. It's pretty much what I've done, a little of this and a little of that, and then take that into my meditation and my contemplation and see what works for me, what makes sense, and what resonates when I wonder about it. And so the idea of an oversoul that stands between the creator and the creation is a radical idea, but it's also earth-shaking and can completely transform, or I think maybe better said, expand your view of things. So that also leads to the concept of mindfulness and communicating with the soul, and the nature of non-attachment, which we'll see how far we get into that today. So having said that, let's do our opening focus, our opening meditation. If you get comfortable in your chair or wherever you happen to be sitting, your sofa or your bed or the floor, get nice and comfortable. Most of us are sitting, so feet flat on the floor, and become balanced and centered. Close your eyes and give yourself a few moments just to settle in, form the intention. Feel the letting go in your body. There's a certain vigilance that goes with being awake and your eyes open, and even if we don't realize it, we're often on guard. And it's sort of like those motion sensing floodlights that you may have outside, and if anything moves, the light comes on. A lot of our waking life is like that. We're always on alert. We're always ready for something unexpected to happen. Simply by closing your eyes, you're saying to the brain, as you do when you go to sleep, no, I'm safe now. We don't have to be so vigilant. I don't have to micromanage my life and make all of these countless decisions. And I don't have to hold my body together. I can even let go in my body and know that the chair or the furniture I'm sitting on will support me. That may seem like a subtle or even silly thing, but try it out. How deeply can you let go? How safe can you feel? Knowing that I'll do a narrative, my voice can go with you, and that we'll all come back together to the wide awake state in just a few minutes. Further, welcome in whatever feelings you have. Welcome them in. Even if it's discomfort, even if it's an unsettled mental nature or a sad emotional nature. Maybe you're very happy and feeling really good. Whatever the case, physically, emotionally, mentally, acknowledge the reality of how you feel. Pain and discomfort, or even frustration and irritation, is always made worse by resisting it. If you push away physical pain, for example, with some sort of effort, some sort of physical tension, some desire to repress it. And of course, this goes for emotional pain and mental confusion as well. You tend to make it worse because the brain's trying to communicate to you. So it's by acknowledging the way you feel, letting your emotions have their way with you, release all your resistance, or physical discomfort, or whatever you feel, without judging it or naming it or pigeonholing it. Don't even label it. Just let it come upon you. And then you move through it, don't you see? Not away from it, but into it and through it and out the other side. And as you continue feeling this letting go feeling from head to toe, any undesirable sense or sensation begins to diminish and fade away as a result of our having acknowledged it. It's a very important concept. Take a few slow, deep breaths, pulling in strength and power as you inhale. Hold for just a moment at the peak, and as you exhale, just as slowly, nice and evenly, feel a letting go feeling. As if when you inhale, you're pulling in clean, fresh, vital air, and as you exhale, like black, oily smoke, you're letting go of stresses and discomfort and irritation and simple confusion. 3 or 4 of those. Deep, cleansing breath. And enjoy that letting go feeling. And then turn your breathing over to autopilot. Just begin to breathe normally as you always do. And let's take just 3 minutes rather than the 14 or 15 or 16 minutes that is really suggested that research indicates makes a difference, to practice our mindfulness and our non-attachment by simply watching your body breathe itself. And do that now. until you hear my voice again. Just 3 minutes. Watch the ebb and flow of your breathing. And if you feel a need to deliberately take a bigger breath, or hold your breath or yawn, allow yourself to do that, but then go back to simply watching your body breathe itself all by itself. Be curious and fascinated. 3 minutes until you hear my voice again. The benefit of this type of practice is that it allows us to consider that we are the observer, not the breather. We could call it detachment, and sometimes beginners in the field will use that word, but it suggests becoming oblivious or disengaged. when in fact we're very much engaged, but we're watching the body breathe. We're the observer, the witness, rather than the breather. And as you develop, even in a matter of weeks, a couple of weeks even, of a regular daily practice, 15 minutes plus or minus, at least 3 or 4 days a week, that's sufficient to create a major shift in your awareness, such that you can begin to observe your thoughts and feelings without suffering the belief that you're the thinker or a victim of your emotions. And that's a wonderful thing. Because now you can begin to discern the difference between a deliberate, purposeful thought or a set of thoughts and the intrusive monkey mind, which is full of negativity and self-doubt, worry, fears of inadequacy, the temptation to compare yourself to other people when even your fingerprints tell you you're incomparable. All of that falls away as you learn to distinguish task-related thinking from task-unrelated thinking. And consider the way that impacts your identity. That monkey mind, those task-unrelated thoughts that bubble up from the unconscious, we call that thinking, but it's just a bunch of ideas that are occurring to you. And what a mindfulness meditation practice does is put us at choice. We can affirm the thoughts we wish to affirm in terms of these random monkey mind, these racing negative thoughts. If every once in a while there's something valuable, beneficial, that's confirmed by your intuition, and you can accept that and embrace those thoughts. And the negative ones, the self-doubt, the self-critical thoughts, when you realize you're not the thinker but the observer, you can say, well, that's not true. That's a bunch of garbage. These are false assumptions that I made in the past. Or these are the result, the byproduct of a part of my brain that thinks I'm in danger and is trying to warn me to the point of almost paranoia. It adds to our stress, but if you just know those are ideas that are presented to you, and you can affirm the ones that you wish to affirm, and release. Again, don't conquer or defeat or overwhelm the negative. Just let it drop. Let it go. Like you dump garbage in the bin. And they may come back. Then you just let them go again. It's much easier to do in these altered states where the mind is still and the heart is calm. And if you ever get one of those unconscious, task-unrelated thoughts that may have some validity, but you're not sure, there's a middle way. Put that on the back burner. Give yourself time to consider whether some or all of it is valid. You're just not sure, that's okay too. But so much of the task-unrelated thinking that is really not us deliberately thinking, it's just voices in our heads from the unconscious. So much of that is negative and untrue. You have to decide who's going to run the show here. Am I going to turn my life over to these random, highly critical, negative voices in my head? Or is the I, who is the observer and the witness of this stream of thoughts, this train of ideation, going to assert myself and say, no, there's a higher self that runs the show. And I'll decide between my logic and my intuition. I will sort through these ideas, these thoughts, and determine which are true and will be embraced, which are false and will be released, and which I'll put on the back burner and consider later. Eckhart Tolle tells a story in one of his books, I think it's The Power of Now, about being very depressed and going through a very difficult stage of his life. And he heard himself say to himself silently in his head, I hate myself when I feel like this. But very quickly another thought followed on, which was sort of, as he reports it, wait a minute. How many of me are there? If I hate the way I feel, well, am I the one who feels sad, lonely, depressed, rejected, frustrated, angry? Or am I the one that's sick and tired of feeling that way? If you ever feel guilty or ashamed, you could ask yourself the same question. Wait a minute. Am I the one that did this shameful thing? Full stop, period. That's the end of it. Or am I the one that is now feeling I could have handled it better? Who's willing to learn and now feels somewhat guilty or somewhat ashamed? Which one? I can't be both. If I can hear the voices in my head, am I the voices in my head? Or the observer, or the witness that can hear the voices and decide whether to embrace or reject? This is the benefit of non-attachment. It's an incredible freedom to stand above the fray, to take an elevated perspective, to see the bigger picture, and to be the awareness of the self, rather than this separative or separated physical form, the body, and even the circumstances in which we find ourselves. Rise above it. This is a way of looking at mindfulness. This is where you shift from identifying as the separated physical self, the persona, which means mask, or the personality, aspiring to be the soul, and identifying instead as the soul above and free of form, embracing the persona nature, caring for it, learning to love yourself, not your ego, but that aspect of yourself as a spiritual being that has incarnated into a very difficult world where there will always be pain and difficulties. Wise women and men often say, the pain is mandatory, the suffering is optional. Sometimes in the literature, this is called the chemical wedding or the spiritual betrothal, where the personality, the soul, marry. The personality, the ego self, the jiva nature, the Atman in form, devotes itself, is married to the soul above and free of form. And you identify as the spiritual self, the soul. Perhaps you've heard the saying, you don't have a soul, you are a soul. You're not a human being with a spiritual nature, you're a spiritual being incarnated into a human form. Let's get the pony in front of the cart. And how do you know the difference? The soul, the higher self, is incredibly humble. It has no sense of itself as separate from anything. These are holidays that we're moving into, the solstice and the associated religious holidays. This is typically a time of celebration. As the days become longer, the nights shorter, the weather warmer, moving towards spring as we round the corner. Time of celebration and gratitude and gift giving. Giving without any need to even be acknowledged. Giving anonymously, without any need to be appreciated. That's true giving. And then we receive in kind. The universe is very much like a mirror in that way. We're never going to receive anything that we haven't already given away, starting with love and consciousness itself. Not merely the giving of material goods, but the attitude of wholeness. The word holy comes from wholeness. There's just one of us here. If somebody upsets you, if they irritate you, if they make you angry, instead of using those feelings to understand them, use those emotions to understand yourself. For they're triggering something in you that needs healing. That's how you know that you're making the shift, the quantum leap, the transformation. Some call it a rebirth, to be born again. Less in a religious context than a spiritual context. Instead of aspiring to go to heaven or be with God or find that deep and profound eternal peace, identify as being that now, the soul above and free of form, appropriating, embracing, and having compassion for the suffering of the personality in form, in a world of form, in its appearance of the other and opposition, filled with unnecessary holding on, grasping and clutching, attachment. Let it go. Together, let's form the intention to return to the waking state. Feel a gentle rising up, a floating upward, the way you wake up when you don't set an alarm. You just enjoy that slow rising up to the waking state. And 3, eyes open, wide awake, back in the room. Eyes open, feeling fine, better than before. Back in the room. Take a nice big breath. And as you exhale, relax, wake up even more fully. Maybe stretch a little bit. Get back in the body. Feeling better than before. Good. Excellent. Thank you. I enjoyed that. Okay, let's talk about the Oversoul. Again, this discussion really has to start with the idea of the preexistence of the soul, which goes back to pagan times, if you wish to use that word. The times of the ancient mysteries, the Prisca Theologia, the ancient wisdom or ageless wisdom, when people intuited their spirituality. And of course, we had shamans and guides and medicine women, medicine men, who played the role of teachers and led certain ceremonies and such. But there was a great consensus about life being animated and illumined by a unified spirit. And popular in these ancient teachings all around the world was this idea of an oversoul that stands between the Godhead, the Creator, and its creation. This is the whole idea of the Son of God in Christianity, or the Buddha nature, standing between the ultimate source and its manifestation. This middle way, as we've discussed. The Son of Father Spirit and Mother Matter. The very word matter, material world, is rooted in mater, mother. Hence Mother Earth and Gaia, nature being a mother. And the only reason that the male gender is overlaid on Father Spirit is that the mother is receptive to the father. Father is causative, mother receptive. They're polarities. To think of God as as a gender, not a woman, but a man, is to push the allegory beyond common sense. For obviously God could not be less than all that is, so God got us all that is. You sometimes hear that phrase in mysticism. But that's the reason for that gender. But the son of the father and the mother, don't you see, the offspring of spirit and matter, the interface or crossroads between energy and mass, as an empirical scientist would describe it, is love, or the consciousness aspect. So one of the most fundamental ways of looking at the Trinity is spirit, consciousness, matter. And so the soul is a way of referring to that Christos, that Buddha nature, that love between the will of the Father, Spirit, and the embodiment that the Mother represents, the manifestation, the body of God. The universe is the body of God. But we're talking today about the soul. Again, not only the indwelling soul, that made in the image of God is nevertheless, as the story goes in Judeo-Christian literature, in the Old Testament and the New Testament doesn't argue it, is stained. It's been corrupted, not because of anything we've done, but we inherited this so-called original sin. This is primarily Catholic doctrine. But the Protestants, the Protestants, spin off, just like all the other denominations, thousands of denominations of Christianity, and half a dozen of Judaism, 3 essentially. This whole story of Adam and Eve, God saying, imagine your parents saying, you can eat anything in the refrigerator except what's in this jar. Well, as soon as they're out of the room, you're going to go right for the jar, right? So here's the garden, here's the paradise. I just don't want you eating off this tree of knowledge. Knowledge of what? Knowledge of good and evil. Because paradise is all good, right? Well, along comes the snake, tempts Eve. She's a naughty girl. She eats the apple and then offers it to Adam, and now we're screwed. I don't mean to mock the story because I think it has validity. It's just, it's been dumbed down. Many people will see the story of Adam and Eve as a choice to incarnate. What if Eden was not on earth, but in heaven, the home of the soul, where the soul has always been? Is it not logical, for example, to recognize that if anything has no end and can live eternally, then it must have no beginning? How could something that has no beginning have an end? How could something have an end or no end and yet a beginning? If it's eternal, it has no beginning and no end, seems to me. And again, I don't want to present this as dogma or the way it is. I'm just offering this to you for your consideration, and it's not mine. There's many, many philosophers, will say, deep thinkers, from time out of mind in all cultures all around the world, that have used logic in this way. It just makes sense. So your soul, if it's going to live forever, if it has any possibility of living forever, whether in heaven or hell or whatever your belief system, it must have no beginning. And yet Christian doctrine since the First Council of Nicaea in 325 has said, no, 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 no. Your soul lives forever, but it definitely has a beginning. Conception. Upon conception, when sperm and egg meet, in human beings, and only human beings, because strict Christian doctrine says animals do not have souls. We'll put that aside for another day. When human sperm meets egg, God makes a soul and tucks it inside you, an indwelling soul, and it's stained. It could have been in the image of God, but it's not because of Eve and the apple and all of that. So you're born a sinner, and you're bad, and you're corrupted. Well, when we're bad, when we behave in, quote, evil, unquote, ways, when we're corrupted, it's by our own egoic sense of being separated and so interested and so self-centered, so survival-oriented, according to the dictates of the brain, that we see everything else as other than. We create and reinforce this illusion of separation. I am not you, and you are not me. And this is not that. And an apple is not an orange. Distinctions of appearance, certainly. Distinctions in form, but energy. You can't divide up energy. It's like trying to take air and divide it into quadrants or sections. Or the air in this box is not the air in that box. They're in different boxes. It's different air. This stuff, these belief systems just don't hold up to this kind of scrutiny. Hence the idea of the preexistence of a soul above and free of form, that incarnates or doesn't incarnate, that incarnates once or reincarnates, depending on your belief system. And again, transmigration can be a synonym for reincarnation, although often the way it's used, transmigration goes beyond human reincarnation to suggest that you could come back as a golden retriever or a cockroach or some other animal form. Apparently not a tree or a flower, but or a rock. Thank goodness. But again, this depends on your belief system. But it's important to note, because we never ever hear this, that the early Christian church fathers, I'll even give you a name, Origen of Alexandria, one of the most renowned and revered of Christian philosophers in those times after Christ. I mean, the Gospels were not even written until roughly the earliest Gospels appear to have been written about 70 years after the death, the resurrection, the ascension of Christ, of Jesus. The earliest Gospels. Then there are Gospels that were written 100 years later, 150 years later. I mean, writing was not reading and writing. Very few people did that. That was a career. You were a scribe if you were one of the handful of people that knew how to read and write. And basically you'd be employed by the king or the emperor to teach them how to read and write. It was only royalty and blue bloods. And they would hire these middle-class scribes who knew how to read and write as a career. But gosh, it wasn't until 100 or 150 years ago that human beings en masse knew how to read and write. Very common for people even 100 years ago in the United States of America, to not know how to read or write. We seem to be cycling back to that. You see these 8-year-olds with their iPads. Are they reading books? Do they know how to read and write? Is there a political benefit to some in power to dumb down America, to refuse to fund the schools, to be absolutely okay with people being more and more obtuse? I think so, but again, another subject for another day. So Origen and many others, early Christian church fathers, believed in the preexistence of the soul, and it wasn't until the Emperor Constantine organized the first Council of Nicaea in what is now Turkey. The city is Iznik. It's called Iznik in Turkey. But the old name back in the day was Nicaea. And I'm not sure I'm even pronouncing that right, because it's Nicaea. So forgive me. But I know it was in 325, and there were others that followed. And that's when these bishops got together and created a canon out of the Apocrypha, all the different books, the letters, the essays that were extant regarding the life of Jesus. And they were very selective because Constantine had an agenda. He was forming a government. He was a Roman emperor. He was not a religious man. But he saw the church as a way to organize power and to raise an army and to control people. And that went on for 1,000 years, the Dark Ages. While the rest of the world moved ahead with science and technology and great literature, even the idea of romance was repressed. Europeans were late to the game. It was like the 11th century, and not really until the Renaissance that they even discovered the idea of romance, which came from the Middle East. Romeo and Juliet. And romance was not an issue. All love came from God. All love was to be directed at God. It was indeed the Dark Ages. There were no universities. There were no books. The church ran the show. You can see this in the Arthurian legends and in the histories of the king didn't really make a move without checking with the Pope or the whoever the grand poobah happened to be of the church. Church and state were one. That's why democracy and the separation of church and state is so critical. Freedom of religion includes freedom from religion, and government shall make no law. They're completely different. Even though there are some that are trying to replace democracy with a theocracy, the white Christian nationalist has an agenda to undermine democracy and replace it with a Taliban-like Christian theocracy, Christian Taliban, or what you see in Iran, where the government is run by the church. In that case, it's Muslims. And even then, a very extreme fundamentalist aspect. All religions have their fundamentalists on one end and their mystics on the other end, sort of like conservative and progressive. So it was this first council of Nicaea when the preexistence of the soul was banned, and the doctrine that says, no, God creates a soul upon conception, tucks it inside. It's stained by Adam and Eve's transgressions. And what's the story? You must accept Christ as your personal Savior. Simply said, believe in Him in order to have a chance to live life in heaven, in paradise, return to paradise forevermore. And if you don't make the cut, we got a bad place downstairs where it's really warm, and the devil runs that. Again, I've yet to hear an explanation of if God and the devil oppose each other and hate each other, why the devil is so happy to run hell on God's behalf as a place of punishment. Seemed if the devil, Satan, Lucifer, whatever, had anonymity and some sort of power representing evil, that hell would be a festival of depravity. But it's not. It's eternal suffering. So I guess the devil works for God. Sorry, I've never heard this explained. I've never heard any preacher, minister, priest, theologian, Christian spokesperson. Muslims have their hell. Buddhists say there's a hell. What is it? It may just be reincarnating back on Earth. We've touched on the law of karma in the past. And yes, Christians do believe in karma. They just don't know it. They call it you reap what you sow. The allegory of the garden. Whatever seed you plant, that's what you're going to reap. Same thing, that's what karma is. So that's a pretty universal law. So I'd love to get some feedback from you guys, some comments or some questions on this whole idea of the existence of the Oversoul, above and free of form, and that the indwelling soul is a reflection or an extension, a fragment or an element of that Oversoul, but that the truth of who you are is a soul. Why would we incarnate and conceivably reincarnate? Well, the only prayer Christ ever taught was about bringing heaven to earth, to redeem evil, which I think is best described as fear and ignorance. That's what evil is. It's fear and ignorance. To redeem that with love and light, with understanding. How does love drive out evil? The same way understanding drives out ignorance. The same way feeling safe drives out fear. But if we think of fear and or better said, evil, as being opposed to goodness, there's some sort of tug of war. And there is no tug of war. Evil is like dark or cold. It's the absence of light or warmth, which are real things. You can measure light. We've talked about this, touched on it briefly in past classes, that we can measure light. It has a speed. It needs a source. It has to come from someplace, right? It's a real thing. It's an emanation of energy. But darkness is the opposite semantically in terms of language, but it's not an opposing force. And the Bible and other holy books are full of references to spirit and spirituality and the love of the divine, this connecting consciousness as being light, the light that drives out the darkness. Well, then follow that allegory to, that means evil exists. It clearly exists, just as darkness exists, but it has no source. What's the source of darkness? There is none. it's like working with the number zero in math. It's very tricky. Uh, what is the speed of darkness? At what speed does darkness spread? These are absurd questions because darkness is not a force. It is not an energy. It is an absence of energy. So too evil is the absence of the light, the absence of goodness. It's pretty easily conquered. So what corrupts us? What is it that needs redemption? It's the ego. It's the jiva nature. It's the persona suffering from the belief that it's alone and separate, trapped in these bodies in a world where everything is separated and we're always reaching out and holding on and begging for connection, suffering the appearances of form. When it's the soul identifying as the soul above and free of form that unifies the polarities of the Creator in its creation, of divine will and the embodiment of that which is divine. This is a wonderful, radical concept, rarely discussed until you begin to dive into, as you guys are doing and perhaps have done and continue to do, the field that we call mysticism or the wisdom traditions of the world, perennialism, the perennial philosophy, the Prisca Theologia, fundamental concepts and beliefs that transcend the separative nature and the competitive nature of organized religion. In a sense, what religions of men, the institutions of organized religion, have done by denying the Oversoul is place themselves between you and your source. So that to know God, to aspire to spiritual growth and unfoldment, you must go through the church rather than your own soul. When in fact, I would suggest the role of the church, the mosque, the temple, is to serve humanity, that we may serve our own oversoul in accord with the ultimate oneness and source of all things. It's very different idea. So it's arguably the church is stealing the soul, the position of the soul, the position of the Christ, the Son, the consciousness between spirit and matter. And the whole idea, that the title of this class, The Wisdom of the Soul, suggests, and this is the direction we're moving in rather quickly as we start a new year. If the soul overshadows us, not merely indwells, that's a reflection. That's like looking in the mirror. If the soul overshadows and stands above and free of form, always has been, always will be. In other words, your soul's already in heaven. It's this separative physical body that lives in hell. The suffering, the self-imposed torment that we put on ourselves. Then what's the church's job? What's the church to do? And further, could we not then communicate with that oversoul? Could we not then develop our intuition so that we can get answers to our questions? And I know many people who pray and practice contemplation, believe they're in touch with God. I would not deny that. Or Jesus. I would not dispute that. Or angels, or saints, or animal spirits, or guardian angels. I'm not here to dispute that. But there's something overshadowing that's really smart. Where did that aha experience come from? That, oh my Lord, you know what I just realized? And out of the whole cloth, this revelation, this epiphany, this lid-lifting aha comes to you already full-blown, already thought out. I'm suggesting that's you. Not in this incarnation. It's not Michael Benner. It's a soul above and free of form. This is referred to in Hinduism as Atman. There's Brahman and then Atman. And this is esoteric concept. Like, they're not separated. It's like layers, like an onion has layers, right? It's the wheel within the wheel. So with that, let me open up the lines, go to Melinda, and again, if you want to use the chat or just raise your hand, I like the idea of using the chat box. It helps you organize your thoughts, boil them down into a single sentence or two. Put your comment or your question in the chat box, and Melinda will call on you. Or you can use that little control in the bottom of your screen to raise your hand, and she'll see you. And gosh, how could you not have a question about this whole idea of the Oversoul? And again, when we become mindful, as we did in our meditation today, mindfully aware, stepping back from the thought stream, stepping back from the emotion, stepping back even from the idea that you are the breather, and be the witness of this body breathing itself, and learn to be the witness of the thinking, and know which thoughts are deliberate and purposeful, and which are just random garbage bubbling up from the unconscious. This is not detachment. This is non-attachment, to gain that elevated perspective, to be the soul that appropriates the personality. Let's talk about it. Melinda?
Right. We don't have any questions yet. If somebody wants to come forward with one, that is the epitome of a deep talk. I'm just a little stunned. I guess we all are part of the same Oversoul. I guess when I look at someone who I diametrically oppose or don't agree with what they've done, or they raise hostile feelings in me, we share an Oversoul.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it always sounds like a dodge to me when I say it depends on who you ask, but it does. I've used the word jiva nature in reference to Hindu literature and belief systems, the Vedantic, excuse me, I got a little tickle. I had some throat spray here, but I don't know where that went. Oh, here we go. Let me use this throat spray. The jiva nature, you see the same thing in the East, where many people think of the jiva as the oversoul that is somewhat separated and distinct. And others will say, oh no, the jiva nature is the Atman of Brahman. This is if you think of the pendulum that we talked about last week, the further down the string you go, the more diverse we become. So maybe there's a little middle ground here between the absolute unity of the top of the pendulum and the chaos and multiplicity at the bottom. As we move closer, you're moving closer to unity. So in Western mysticism, the soul lives in groups or houses. What would be between unity and diversity or multiplicity, but some sort of group. And these are often referred to as ashrams or houses of the holy. The one, the group, the many would be another trinity. And in many schools of mysticism, theosophy in particular, there are 7 houses or 7 groups of souls. Theosophy has its exceptions too. There's something called this ashram of synthesis that stands somewhat apart in that it has a particular mission for the time in which we find ourselves, but that's getting off into the weeds here. So Western mysticism often says, well, souls are never alone, only personalities, incarnated humans, sense that separation and aloneness. The middle position, the soul, knows that it is the source of the incarnated human, but it also, in quotes, shares the ground of God. So it knows that it is not separate from its source, that it stands in the middle between that divine unity and the separation of the personality and form. So whether it lives in groups or houses, families of souls, or whether it is as unified as the Godhead itself, really depends on who you ask. I sort of favor the idea of the group, but in a practical sense, all I know is that when I get quiet and I have a problem or a situation that I need insight into, if I ask my higher self and I'm patient, I mean, a matter of seconds or minutes, really. Maybe it takes 10 or 15 minutes, but often it's 30 seconds. I get an answer. And it's not the kind of insight I get in normal consciousness. It's usually, as the aha experiences often are, quite a revelation, quite an epiphany, sort of a mind-blowing, oh my God, well, of course, that, thank you, wow, that's really helpful. That really settles it. This is intuition. I don't know why it's not taught in school. I mean, you ever had a teacher say, if you don't know the answer to a multiple choice, trust your first impression?
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever have a teacher tell you that? Is that not intuition? Isn't that what they're teaching? If you're,
we have 3 questions that have come in. Comments
okay. Okay, if your thinking mind doesn't know the answer, this is what the teacher is saying, then stop thinking, stand open and receptive to your first impression. Trust that. And it was always my experience, if I did not know the answer and the first impression didn't feel right, so I ignored it, I'd get it wrong. But if I trusted that first impression, even if I didn't, would never have conceived of it otherwise, never even thought that this is the right answer. If I nevertheless trust it, I'm right more often than not. So that's the closest that I've ever come in my life to being taught how to use my intuition. But I think that insight, that understanding comes from your own oversoul. That's my sense of it. It's not Jesus. It's not Mohammed, it's not Krishna or Vishnu, it's not Brahman or the Godhead, it's my own soul, above and free of form. He's not a he or a she. My soul is not Michael Benner. It's a loving essence of the radiance that is the source of all things. Very difficult to talk about. Mm-hmm. Okay, go ahead and call on somebody.
Sure, Hannah.
Hi, I'm in AA, and so I always want to say, hi, I'm Hannah, I'm an alcoholic. So thank you, Michael. As usual, I have like more comment than question necessarily, and I think I'm a little more on topic, but half my family's Catholic and half my family's Jewish. So I've always found workarounds, and I heard somewhere along the way, somebody changing the Lord's Prayer, just a couple of lines. They say, hallowed be thy names, plural. And they say, give us this day our daily breath, which I really love. and also steer us not into temptation, but deliver us from ego. And I thought that was really cool.
I do too. I like that. That's what needs redeeming, not the soul. It's the ego, the animal nature. The part of us that thinks we're separate, alone, and abandoned in this fleshy body, in this world of separated form, of poverty and cruelty and war and murder and rape and hatred. And this is hell. It's beautiful. We're capable of wonderful things, but this is hell. We're already in it, and the soul's already in heaven. There's your dichotomy.
And then there are two other comments I wanted to make, and one is, so again, like, it's just because of conditioning, you know, my image of God, quote unquote, is, I guess, for lack of a better term, separate from me, up in the sky, whatever. So, you know, the God is you, frankly, does make me bristle, but that's just my own discomfort. But what I did, I have started to come around to understand that in a grounding meditation, and I say, I call forth my higher self, I call forth my divine self, and I started thinking of it not like my divine entity up there, but like the divine in me, to like conjure just even just like compassion, or just like that it is somewhere in me, my higher self, my better self, my yeah, I guess maybe my overarching self that's in me. And that it, you know, I mean, if everything is one, then a part of that one is inside of me. And the other thing I want to say, and I'm going to risk taking a minute to do this, and because every time I come to your or talk to you or anything, Bill W. from AA and Maria Montessori comes to mind a lot. And you said something today about, well, in Montessori, we introduce each subject area with a great story. And we introduce the area of geography with a story called God Who Has No Hands. And it's kind of like a combination of the creation story and the Big Bang Theory. And there's this one little paragraph I want to read, just 3 or 4 sentences. And I'm going to, and it says, it talks about, like, people have always wondered, who is God? Where is God? And it talks about God creating all things. And then it says, many people thought this was just a tale. How could someone with no hands and no eyes make things? If God is a spirit who cannot be seen or touched or heard, how could he have made the stars that sparkle overhead, the seas which are always astir, the trees, the flowers, and the scent they shed around them? Perhaps God could make invisible things, but how could God make the visible world? It's all very well, they thought, to say that God is everywhere, but who has ever set eyes on God? How can we be sure God is anywhere? They tell us God is the master who everybody and everything obeys, but why on earth should we believe that? So I just wanted to share that. And that is a story that we tell to 6-year-olds.
Thank you. We do have 3 more comments lined up, just to let you know. We have got a flurry of comments now. Let's
go to that. Thank you, Hannah, for that. I love that story.
Patrick, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi. Well, I would like to say a lot. Michael, you're right. This is it's so enormous. The conversation is about the infinite energy of the universe. It go on and on. I got so much, because I think I'm finally coming around. Like, a lot of things are just coming into this whole scene. And you're a big part of it, Michael. I appreciate it. You can't get behind it. It was a thing that resonated a couple of weeks ago. I'm like, man, if I could just understand that. And I think I finally have a visual. When I have more time, I'll share it with you. But yeah, watching the observer. It's all coming into place, and it's really awesome, you know. And you're killing my apple story with Eve. I thought it was a real apple, but maybe we shouldn't be eating apples. I don't know. I like apples, but so much to go on, you know. Also, I found audiobook of Power of Now, and it's just amazing because I can't read that well as far as like long-term comprehension, just and stick with it. But this audiobook has really been a miracle. And the Power of Now, you know, Eckhart Tolle, I've just realized how to say his name. I found out how to say his name right. Mentions that, you know, yeah, we have arms and eyes and legs that can make all the stuff we have, but it wasn't our mind that made us or this planet or everything else in the universe. So I'll leave it right there.
All right. Consider that, again, we are fragments or elements of the one mind and the one heart. And so when we attempt, as Hannah made reference to consider as mystics or those who pursue wisdom, the idea that God is in us as a soul, but we are in God. Remember, we've talked about immanent and transcendent. How could we be outside of God? How could we exist if God was not in us? These are not opposites. They're complementary truths. But people fear saying, I am God, and they probably should because the language doesn't convey it properly.
I'm sorry, I said it to my brother a couple months ago, and you should have seen. I mean, he was on the phone, so you should have just heard. I could feel what was coming because he'd gotten way whacked out in a Christian Seventh-day Adventist, which, you know, is fine with me. I don't care. All religion's fine if it works for you, and I love it. I was raised like, I don't know, part like, you know, like Catholic and Holy Roller Christian on the other side, and I just got it mixed, and it was all crazy. But oh my God, I said I'm God because we're getting okay.
Yeah, you got to say I am an extension or a manifestation of that which is divine. So divine lives in me as well as I live in that. But I think the fear that people have about that has to do with believing that they are then superior to all things, that God is great, God is awesome, God is beyond comprehension, all-knowing, everywhere, equally present, all-powerful. In fact, God is, the concept is beyond superiority or inferiority. And so the closer your approach to your source, to the Creator, the more humble you will be. And that's a great way of checking your attitude as you pursue the divinity within you. If it makes you feel superior to others, you're barking up the wrong tree. If the egoic sense of a separated self begins to dissolve and melt away, and you find yourself feeling more humble, less egocentric, less concerned with the separative self, more concerned with the whole, with the group, with the totality of things, then you know you're moving in the right direction toward compassion. Humility is a big indicator, you know, am I giving up this fear-based sense of self? The more self-centered we are, the more filled with fear we are. And the more filled with fear we become, that ignorance is more likely to turn us away from humility toward a sense of survival and I, me, mine. And so even couples who are married and devoted to each other will argue about, well, you started it. There is no you in a marriage. There is no me in a real marriage. There's just us. But that's the challenge. The best marriages are not devoid of conflict. They're just willing to work their way through the difficulties and the challenges in a respectful and loving and compassionate way.
Michael, we do have 2 more people that would like to comment.
Go right ahead. Thank you, Patrick, for that.
And Tony. Tony, are you ready?
You gotta unmute, Tony.
Tony, no?
Why don't you go to the other one? We'll come back and give Tony a chance.
Tony will come back to you. Dora, did you have something to comment on?
Yes, I did, Michael. That's why I'm here. I used to meditate regularly, and I was at a point where if I had a problem or an issue, I was just quiet my mind, and within minutes as well, I would get an answer. But I somehow lost that connection, and I can't figure out why. I still do some meditation, and I still try to be mindful of my thoughts, but I lost that connection somehow.
Without getting too personal, because it's not a counseling session here, there's a lot of people listening. Have there been particular stresses in your life of late? Do you think maybe 6 years of Donald Trump and 2.5 years of the pandemic and the internet and social media, do you think is beginning to wear on us and bring us down?
Probably is, but that's why I'm here. I followed you a long time ago, and I'm focused on meditating and finding that connection once again.
It's a matter of safety. You really have to feel safe to see. The brain in many ways is a filter. We don't think of the brain as a filter. I never did until, I'll be honest with you, the first time I did acid in college. And while the psychedelics scrambled my thinking and in many ways mimics psychosis, my awareness not only remained clear, but became enormously expanded. And I found meaning and beauty and harmony in everything. It was just unbelievable and difficult to conceive or even recall the enormity of my expanded awareness. And I journaled at the time because I wanted to remember the experience. And the first words I wrote down on the page was, I know I'm insane on this drug right now. I know I'm crazy. Well, again, it's like the thought process is all separated from reality. I'm a lunatic in terms of my mentality, but my awareness is not only lucid, but greater than before. So in the literature I've studied and all the research that's been done, that was over 50 years ago, we see that this seems to be what's happening when the psychedelic finds those pre-existing receptor sites. This is another story, like why would there be receptors in the brain for psychedelic chemicals unless the brain generates, and yeah, that's the neurotransmitters. Should talk to Melinda about this. She has better information than I do about serotonins and endorphins and dopamine and these neurotransmitters. But just suffice to say that it helps to think of the brain, and the mind is not the brain. The mind is not limited to the brain. The mind is much more comprehensive than that. But the brain is a kind of a filter to focus our awareness so that it can be selective, so that you can, well, again, focus or pay attention, odd phrase, to narrow in on something particular. The Beatles did a song, a psychedelic song, a tribute to psychedelic consciousness. It's all too much. It's the love streaming all around you. The walls begin to breathe, and everything becomes alive and vivified, and it's just all too much, because what the psychedelic seems to do is open these filters in the brain. But we can't handle that. We're not intended to handle that, see? So many of us turn to Eastern philosophy and meditation to make a more organic, more natural approach to gently expanding awareness a little bit at a time. But it's stress, anxiety, and tension, Dora, that bring us down, and sometimes we may feel like we're losing that contact with the Oversoul and the source beyond that, but it's never lost. I know you said you lost it, but it's there waiting patiently, and work on managing your stress. Take a little inventory. Am I eating good food? Am I getting plenty of bed rest? Am I managing and simplifying my life in such a way that I'm not micromanaging and constantly worrying? And that'll facilitate your meditation and your contemplation, and I'm sure you'll rediscover it, probably on a whole new level.
Thank you.
Yeah. Don't ever give up on that. Did Tony ever figure out his unmute dilemma? Melinda?
I think Jack is ready to put his comment in.
Okay, we're running over a little, Jack. Give me what you got.
It's quick. And so is the witness consciousness in meditation more an aspect of the Oversoul? And does awakening to that then help create the mystical marriage between the embodied soul and the Oversoul?
Yes, yes, and yes. Although, again, it's not a light switch. It's a dimmer. It's a process of unfolding. So what initially expands is our awareness of the separated self, and then that sort of blends gently into an elevated awareness that would be more soul-oriented than persona-oriented. But again, the persona, I'm suggesting, is an extension of, or a reflection of, the Oversoul. It's not really separate or all that distinct from. It's just the consciousness or the awareness of the soul has to work its way through the filters I just talked about of the brain to get into an animal body that is primarily survival-oriented. And only now, I mean, first of all, humans are only 3 million years old. We just got here. We've only had language for 3,000 years, written language 2,000 years. Most people are able to read only the last 100 years, right? My God, light bulbs, 130 years. We just got here. So to begin to move beyond survival, to give up war, for example, that's a manifestation of the fear that is hardwired into the brain so that we will survive. We are, at this point in our evolution, the offspring of people who were easily terrified. The philosophers, the ancient philosophers, who, when facing something unknown, sat around and pondered it, were more likely to die and less likely to procreate and pass that quality on. We're the offspring of the people who got terrified really quickly and either fought or ran. And we've inherited that hair trigger. But by becoming increasingly civilized and kinder and gentler and evolving, there has to be a paradigm shift in the way we think of ourselves and each other, and lead with that kindness, lead with that humility, and the way it impacts our whole mission in life, which goes beyond buying stuff and acquiring stuff and refusing to face the fact that our desire nature is never going to be satiated. That's that's one important way of talking about the root of our problem is we're constantly trying to fill something that cannot be filled. As soon as you get that thing that you had to have, desire nature goes looking for something else that you've got to have, and you're never satiated, you're never fulfilled, unless and until you can stand back from that desire nature, recognize it as an animal impulse, and be more selective in the way we behave and the way we prioritize our lives. We're standing on the brink of a whole new stage in our evolution. The emergence of the kingdom of conscious souls is the way it's been presented to me by some of my teachers. And just imagine if beyond humanity as we know it, in our horrible, cruel history of barbarism and war and murder and horrible corruption, all of our institutions are just corrupt to the max. And yet, increasingly, we're seeing, in spite of all of this, such kindness and such goodness and such willingness to sacrifice for others that this has got to emerge. It's just so slow that in a single lifetime we're not going to see the growth that we want to see, but got to believe it's coming. And the human being that fights war and rapes women and even steals things that are not ours and slanders other people and looks for power and money, greed, self-centeredness. These are dinosaurs. You can hear the dinosaurs screaming even now as they recognize their own distinction, their own extinction. A lot of denial. But what is conservative? But and I don't really mean conservative. There's merit in true conservatism, but the fascism now that's being called conservative, these are the screams of the dinosaurs recognizing their extinction. And it'll be hundreds and hundreds of years before it's noticeable, but you can look for it and find some comfort in it, I think. Okay?
Thanks.
Thank you, Jack. I'd love to hear your answer to that same question, because I know you're really knowledgeable on this stuff. People, thank you. Namaste, aloha, salam, Merry Christmas. Join us next week. We'll be here one more time and take a couple of weeks off. Remember, we're on YouTube. Please subscribe. It makes a difference. It raises us in the search levels. Also, we're podcasting an edited version of this. It's on all podcast players and apps. And check out my website if you'd like to take advantage of the free one-on-one session. No obligation, absolutely free. Unmute, say goodbye. Hello and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye.
Happy holidays, folks. See you next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Holidays.